I think it is something that we have been expecting for a very long time. Indeed, the agreement has been a very protracted one if you consider its timeline from approximately 2 years ago. So for it to have come at this time, yes, we can say that it has finally been achieved in terms of an objective that was set 2 years ago. And for me, that is the positive aspect of it. But listening to you earlier on, and also reading the commentary around it, I think there is a lot about it that we still need to decipher and to be more realistic about our expectations of what its debt restructuring can do for us.
Well, the finance minister says bondholders have graciously agreed to provide $4.4 billion in cash flow relief during the IMF program, in addition to the cancellation of $4.7 billion of the debt stock. For the untrained eyes like ours, who perhaps do not have that training in finance, what is it trying to tell us?
So, first, it is important to understand that the problem that took us through this restructuring is still there. And that is very clear. So Ghana was a country in debt distress, which is why part of the reasons why the country sought the IMF program and had to undergo various treatments, including the debt restructuring. So the debt restructuring being achieved in terms of its comprehensiveness, if you talk about the domestic debt restructuring, the bilateral external debt restructuring, and now the commercial external debt restructuring that we are talking about. These have been achieved, but we should make it clear that Ghana still remains a country in debt distress. So our situation hasn't changed overnight just because an agreement was reached. And it is also important to mention that the indicators of debt sustainability are still not very good in the face of Ghana. So for me, we need to really understand that we have undergone some debt restructuring, and indeed some have been very painful restructuring, talking about the domestic debt restructuring and its impacts on domestic bondholders, which are still lingering on. So we need to understand that the stark realities facing the country, and just achieving a mere agreement does not change the country's situation overnight.
Because when the finance minister spoke in London, one of the things he said, in fact, he even said that, told the audience that they should watch the CD from tomorrow. I think that was either yesterday or either yesterday or Monday. Watch the CD from tomorrow. Is the finance minister creating unrealistic expectations of this arrangement?
Well, I watched the CD yesterday, and I haven't seen any significant change yet that I can talk about. But again, I wouldn't go onto the finance minister directly because, he is finance minister and he may be in possession of information that I don't know. But from a pure economic technocrat point of view, things do not change like that. So achieving a debt restructuring agreement, or even having some funds hit the BOG accounts, does not mean that the next day the exchange rate stabilizes or the CD appreciates or anything like that. It takes time adjust to the situation. But to put it in perspective, in the case of Ghana, I think it's too early for anybody to start jubilating about positive prospects just because of the agreement that was achieved. Because if you look at what leads to debt sustainability, they are linked with structural issues of the economy. And in the case of Ghana, what drives our debt? What has led to Ghana's debt accumulation over the years have been, one, you can talk about depreciation, particularly on external debt. And we all know where we are today with depreciation. From year to date, the city has depreciated around 20% to the US dollar. And that is significant loss of value. And that is still happening. And as that happens, your quantum of external debt tends to increase in terms of ECD terms, and it makes your debt servicing also difficult. Again, you want to look at interest rates and growth. And I find it interesting that the finance minister mentioned growth. But in an economic sense, the importance of growth to your debt servicing, to your debt sustainability, is not when you compare it with previous growth rates, but it is when you compare it with your prevailing interest rates. So, but we are currently in a situation that the prevailing interest rates in Ghana, and indeed those in the external market, are very, very, very divergent. So interest rates are way above our growth rates. And of course, for the external, currently Ghana hasn't got what it takes to borrow from the external market. But even if you look domestically, you know what the average interest rates are, both in terms of government treasury bills and commercial bank lending rates. So that differential reduces the propensity or the strength or the effectiveness of the impact of your growth on reducing your debt and attaining debt sustainability. Now, you want to also look at what overall leads to debt sustainability, which is your export revenues. And if you look at the situation currently in Ghana, I think the Bank of Ghana released the May economic summary of financial and economic data. And clearly you would see that although exports have increased compared to, the previous period last year, you will see that Ghana's key export generating commodities are on the decline. For example, cocoa exports have seen a significant decline between the period under discussion and the same period last year. And then other exports are also declining, which means that if this trajectory continues, then our debt sustainability indicators, which is our debt service to revenue to exports ratio and others, are going to worsen. And so the prospects of debt sustainability in the future still hinges a lot upon the macroeconomic fundamentals. And why am I saying that? You cannot talk about debt in isolation. Debt is linked very much to the macroeconomic fundamentals. And I heard Professor Gachi talk about, depreciation, inflation, and others. And these are not looking good currently in Ghana. So I think that the agreement is a wake-up call for us to really get our loins as a country and do what it takes in terms of proper economic management to improve on our debt sustainability indicators and eventually come out of this situation of debt distress that we find ourselves in as a country.
So there's certainly a lot of work to do, but you just pointed out to some of the things that we need to watch. In the interim, this government has about, let's say, some 5 months. What can they do to leverage on this space that they've been given by the bondholders to perhaps put Ghana on a path towards recovery? What do you recommend that they do?
Well, I think that in 5 months, we will call that in economics a short term. And I think what the handlers of the economy can do is to really lay a sound footing, a sound economic basis for overall economic recovery from the medium to the long term. Honestly, from where I sit, I don't think that it is possible to turn Ghana back to back into stability in the next 5 months. I mean, the government's own projections does not show that in terms of the fiscal deficit, in terms of NDA inflation and all that. And to go down to it, what are these sound footing or bases that I'm talking about? First, there is the need to ensure that we have what I would call true communication about the economy. I think that is very important because information plays a role in economic management. It plays a role in building trust with private investors. And if you look at Ghana's situation currently, aside the IMF money that we are expecting and maybe project or program loans from other development partners, including the World Bank, the African Development Bank, and other bilaterals, the only source of external financing that can come into the country is private investment. And the private sector will take you on your word only if you are communicating what they also know to be the truth. So I think that is very important in terms of our communication as a country. Indeed, if the situation is bad and you are saying it is good, then as an investor, what they say is, oh, so are they not speaking the truth or they don't know what the situation really is? And you know, both situations are not, neither of the situation is good. And secondly, I think that this year being an election year, there is the need that the government really exercises a lot of fiscal discipline. And by fiscal discipline, I'm talking about really on government spending. You know, I think that over the years we've seen a lot of taxes in the country, and I heard you ask Prof. Gachi about the Kenya situation and how people are protesting against taxes and where it's got into. I think that on the revenue side, we as a country, we have, you know, done quite well, albeit by increasing the burden on many income earners. But now the government has to do its part. And the part of the government it has to do is to be able to manage its expenditure, particularly this year being an election year. I mean, if you look at Ghana's fiscal deficit, it's very pro-cyclical in relation to elections. Whenever there are elections, you know, the fiscal deficit surges and the difference between what was put in the budget and the actuals tend to be very wide. So that has to be really, really an aspect that government has to look to. And then lastly, what I would want to talk about is inflation. I think that in the short term, the Bank of Ghana can intervene, can use its policy tools to ensure that inflation is reduced to levels that will help, you know, retain confidence in the cedi. Because this depreciation depreciation that is happening is also partly because the cedi is losing its value, and so people want to hold US dollars. That is all. And that fuels the demand for dollars, the depreciation and others. So I think inflation can be, it can be really reduced up to December. We have seen some reductions already, but it is still high. And then if you want to talk about it in terms of its impact on the cost of living, we have all seen how prices are surging these days, from basic food, food commodities, to utilities, electricity and water. And I think that it won't be proper for me to just talk about the macro and not talk about what government can do to also help us citizens to minimize, the cost of living, the high cost of living and its impact on us.
Very interesting proposals. First, as for the true communication part, but the fiscal discipline part, because already I can point to a few major projects that is going on within the Greater Accra Enclave. There's one that is close to me, is the Obechebulamte interchange. That's the phase 2 that's ongoing. There is the one that goes, is a Flower Pot overpass that's currently ongoing. There's even what is happening on the Sawam Road. Those are major projects you're doing an election year. One of the things you like to show is some deliverables that you hope. And this government is already struggling with people believing that they are the best government going forward. But if you deliver this, people will believe that at least perhaps you can deliver some things to them if you are able to deliver these projects. Is it not a difficult thing to ask of a government in this position?
So if you talk about some of the projects that you mentioned, usually some of these are projects that are coming from previous years and they have already been signed and funding sources already allocated. Those if it is those, they are not really a threat. But what are the biggest threats are direct election related spending for the sake of winning power by the incumbent. So that is where the problems come from. And in that sense, I am talking about what in economics we will call recurrent expenditure.
Okay.
So recurrent expenditures are definitely always within the current period. But for some of the capital expenditures like the construction and others, they may also be from the current period, but mostly, as I already said, these are projects. For example, I have seen the overhead being done across East Legon and the overpass East Legon and Kentex area. And I think I've seen this project under construction for almost the last three years or so. So it is possible that project funds were already allocated to that. But the real risk is in electioneering spending. For example, how much of money goes into using the government machinery just to be able to retain power? And then also, other monetary incentives that get involved in elections. And I think those ones are under the control of the government.
So does that even include, for example, the vice president on his feet was challenged by a young lady deciding that, tomorrow we'll release 160 million to pay off your your allowance arrears, and then also the finance minister then going to say that we are going to release 1.5 billion to pay those who are affected under the financial sector cleanup. Is that a kind of in the moment expenditure you're talking about?
You're right to call it in the moment expenditure. I like that expression. So in the moment expenditures are where the problems, really mentioned, two examples from the finance minister and the vice president. I mean, if we do not check this now, we are in to even hear more, because the political atmosphere is going to get more charged and charged as we approach the election.
And let me conclude on the portion of inflation. Recently, the Bank of Ghana even talked about their further losses after the ones they announced earlier, which was over 60 billion. They have announced further losses. There are those who say, as for the inflation, it's the Bank of Ghana that is causing it. What can government do on the fiscal side to improve it?
So on the physical, well, I mean, clearly they have to work together, the monetary authority and the fiscal, and the disconnect between the two has also partly led to the problems we are facing. For the side of government, I think that first, government appetite for borrowing in the domestic market has to also be checked. Because you have a situation where the central bank is financing government through issuance of treasury bills. Of course, not a direct financing, because there are external investors who buy these bills. But as long as government keeps doing that, government's own side of funding using the domestic borrowing increases so much that the spending pressures in the economy really goes up. And then also, I think on the side of government, one thing that government can do to help the monetary authority is to ensure the independence of the monetary authority, is to really allow the Bank of Ghana to be able to take decisions to reduce inflation and not, be influenced by the fiscal authority, which is basically government.
Okay. Doc, thank you. Mr. Awanzam, thank you very much for speaking to us.
Thank you very much, Eric, for having me.
Okay, this is Senna, by the way. Eric is my producer. I am Senna.
All right.
Senna, yes.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.